action-packed full agenda. And I just wanted people to start by introducing myself. My name is John Ramos, and I'm the state and national committee man for the Florida Democratic Party.
Yay!
Yay.
And former chair of this club. And that's why I'm not once, twice. Exactly. So, but this club is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I know.
Don't underestimate this current people crowd that's here. Normally, depending, you fill this place up. So it's just a heavy flow that clubs across the county and clubs across the state have to go through. So it's basically, we depend on the members to pass the word. Share the information, the dates, times, location, and whatever the program that every month is a very interesting, appropriate, issue-oriented program. So you want to, pretty much spread the word. Okay, now let's get this thing started. All right, I'm going to bring up Pat O'Hearn. She was one of the committee members for the nominating committee. And she will explain, they went through a whole list of folks that were interested in running for a position of the club as officers and board members. Pat O'Hearn.
Of the nominating committee. President Michael Cantwell, Vice President Robert Averack, Secretary Cheryl Perry, Treasurer David Bullock, Parliamentarian John Ramos, Director Mary Fader, Director Marion Bullock, Director Patricia O'Hearn, and Director Robert Resnick. Is there anyone else who would like to run, let me know now.
Going once. Anybody interested in running? Those positions that are
Yes. No?
going twice. No, this is Robert's rules. Robert's rules. So going 3 times. Okay. Then I would like to congratulate the new board. Congratulations.
Thanks, John. I'm not going to say very much now because we want to get the program started. It's unfortunate Nancy Albano couldn't be here tonight. She had a medical procedure today. She was our president for the last year. She did a great job. I'm going to be the 4th president since we came down here in 2014, and I'm just hoping to carry on the tradition. As John said, it's really important that we get more and more people. When I came down here, I thought, great, my vote finally counts. I lived in New York most of my life. Your vote doesn't count. In Florida, I came down 2014. Scott got reelected. 2016, Rubio got reelected. Trump got elected. 2018, DeSantis and Scott goes to the Senate. It's maddening, and we need to do something about it. There are more Democrats than Republicans in Florida, and Republicans vote more often than Democrats. And part of that is on us. We need to get out there. We need to be on the street. We need to be giving out literature. We need to be going door to door, so that people, Democrats should be just as energized, more so than Republicans. So.
I have just one suggestion for that. When we have our meetings,
Yeah.
if we have, of course, informational for at least half the time, but one time we were writing cards.
Oh, yes.
If we
Yes.
put hands on here,
Right.
that would be helpful too.
Right, and also planning. I mean, we need more committees. We need a publicity committee. We've got a good newsletter. It doesn't get out as much as it should. I mean, we ought to be giving it out in neighborhoods where we live. People ought to be able to take 5, 10 copies and give them to their neighbors. And we really need to have, I think, a street presence. Move On is out, I think, weekly at Atlantic and Swinton. banners and posters. We need to have a Democratic Club of Delray Beach poster. Republicans are killing you, killing us, because that's what's happening. With the 2 petitions we have outside on assault weapons, they're killing us by allowing those weapons out on the street, and they're killing us by not having a Medicaid rollout in this state. I mean, if you take a ratio of 1 per 1,000, if there's 800,000 people that could be getting Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, and the governor won't allow it, that's 800 people that die every year, statistically. So, anyway, let me get Marion. And are you gonna introduce Jeff? Marion, as my cousin David says, has never been wrong.
Politically, it's like the Pope in
that is
infallible in politics.
Yeah, I've known her 68 years. 1 year more than her son over there.
It couldn't have been a more appropriate time for this meeting, since the last one was canceled, that was supposed to be on gun violence, and it was canceled because of gun violence. So this really comes right into place. I've heard Jeffrey Cashman speak on different occasions. I know many people here have already mentioned it too. He's a retired education teacher, college instructor, and school administrator. But what's more is he has built up a PowerPoint that really deals with the question in detail. So we were very pleased to be able to get him to come, and I'm sure we'll all enjoy it. I'm not so sure we'll enjoy it exactly, but maybe it'll move us to take more action.
Okay.
All right.
So let's see if we can kill some lights. Right here.
Keep going. Get this one again.
The first one.
Okay, it's okay.
There you go.
All right. Okay. I'm Jeff Cashdan, and I'm a former chair of the Legal and Voters Gun Safety Committee today, and I'll speak on behalf of the Legal and Voters. I've been affiliated with the ACLU. I'm not speaking on behalf of the ACLU, and I'm very pleased to have Arlene Houston, who also was on the committee that I ran, that continues under another leadership in terms of what's called gun safety, which a term which I have problems with. Arlene and I created a handout which was forgotten, so you'll get that next week. With that one piece of paper, each one of us, each one of you, can become an advocate on behalf of gun safety or reasonable gun regulations. So here we see, of course, the conflating of the American flag with guns, and this is the reality that we typically face. And this is a Palm Beach Post cartoon, and you hear this all the time. Now is not the time to discuss gun control. And all those tombstones have all the different places up to that point that have been involved with mass shootings. I'm sorry? Oh, by the way, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have a microphone if you need it. Should I take out the microphone?
Use the microphone.
All right. I forgot all about that. Okay, so this is better now, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to sit down, so I have notes on this, and I'd like to be able to use them. So we start with the Second Amendment. We constantly hear about the Second Amendment. How many of you are aware of the fact that the Second Amendment has 2 clauses? Not 1, 2. Raise your hand if you knew that. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 or 9 people. A lot of people did not know that. What we always hear is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The part that you don't hear about, you never hear the NRA talk about, is the first clause. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the state. I want you to look at that wording. First of all, well-regulated. A well-regulated militia. One of the things that you hear as a trope all the time is that we need guns to protect us against the excesses of tyrannical government. But look at the wording there. It says, necessary to the security of a free state. It doesn't say necessary to protect us against the powers of a tyrannical state. It doesn't say that. So the purpose of the second clause is to protect a free state, the security of a free state. But the question is this, am I in anybody's way if I stand up?
No.
Well, is this what a regulated state should look like? And we see this all the time. I was giving this talk, or Arlene and I were doing petitions at Valencia Reserve, and I bumped into the president of the Rifle Club, and he said that the United States is one of the safest countries in terms of gun violence. Well, take a look at that. Italy's number 2. So the question is, does our country have a gun problem? You decide. Of course, you can see that clearly. We have a gun problem, gun violence problem. But the problem is more nuanced than one would think. So here are some categories of gun fatalities. So suicides, 19,392 in 2010. You do not hear the NRA talk about the role of guns in suicide. You never hear that. So homicides, 11,000. Mass shootings that we hear about all the time, 475. Compare the 475. Let me just do one thing here. Okay. Compare the 475 to the suicide rate, and you see that their focus on mass shootings is completely fallacious in terms of representing the nature of the problem. Defense is called justifiable homicides. They say, well, protect my home against. How often does that happen? Well, in 2012, it happened 259 times. And yet in 2010, almost 20,000 people were killed. Yes?
Why are the years different?
Because the statistics come in at different rates.
Okay.
And I picked these up from all different places to put this together like this. So home invasions, protection against home invasion, 94. So the things that we see, look at terrorists, by the way. So this is statistics from the United States. Picked it up. I try to do citations. I got trapped one time. I was giving this talk at Palm Beach State College, and some people there were real gun advocates, asked me, well, where are you getting your information from? And I had no citations on my PowerPoint. I was stuck. So I changed that situation. So 18 from dealing with terrorists. All the things that we're told that are issues, terrorists, home invasions, and mass shootings, pale in comparison to suicides and homicides. These facts are just crazy. More American civilians have been killed by gunfire since 1968 than all the soldiers shot in all the wars since the Revolutionary War. That's insane. More preschool children were killed by guns in 2007 than police officers. We have a greater chance of being shot by a toddler than by a terrorist. You never hear that. Every year, over 100,000 people are victims of gun violence in the USA. On an average, over 33,000 of those are shot. Of those shot are fatalities. So we always hear about the 33,000, but there's 100,000 or more who are shot every year. American civilians own 74% of firearms, while American police and military service combined own 23%. The United States, with 5% of the world's population, owns almost 50% of civilian firearms. By the way, this particular talk today is pretty ironic because it was scheduled for last month, and you know why it was canceled? Because of the shooting right here. That's pretty ironic. So these facts. Does Florida have a gun problem? Again, I ask you to decide. From 2001 to 2010, more than 3 times as many people were killed by guns in Florida than the number of U.S. soldiers killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Florida gun deaths were 20,651, and combat fatalities were 5,320. Someone is killed with a gun in Florida every 4 hours. 1 child is shot in Florida every 17 hours. Here's a part of the issue that you don't hear a whole bunch about, and that's the gun industry lobby. The firearms industry economic impact in the U.S. totals an estimated of $16.5 billion plus over 263,223 jobs. The country's largest firearms retailer is Walmart. Now, Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods are beginning to change their policy about guns, so we are at a point which I think is a probable or possible tipping point in the zeitgeist in turning guns. The NRA's Wayne Lapierre stated in a speech to gun manufacturers. This is really important. This is a quote from Wayne Lapierre. He said, "This program, the NRA, is geared to your companies," and I put in parentheses, the gun manufacturers industry, corporate interest. The NRA, he's saying, is geared to your corporate interest. From the Palm Beach Post, the NRA helps stay gun control efforts, and this is about Marco Rubio, we just heard about, and how much money he takes from the NRA. So here is the next chapter, which is myth versus reality. We constantly, and in the paper that you're going to be getting, I hope, next time, is all of this, the myths and the reality. And the reason is, when you're speaking with people who are gun advocates, and they pop one of these myths on you, you will have an answer in your hand. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That's Wayne Lapierre, that's his famous statement. The reality is that 2/3 of all gun fatalities are suicides. Think about that for a second. Good guy with a gun, bad guy with a gun, suicides. In 2015, 3,387 children and teens were killed or injured by gunfire. Myth 2, guns give women protection against sexual violence. Domestic violent assaults are 12 times more likely to result in death if there's a gun involved, and 5 times more likely to result in death if there is just a gun in the house. It doesn't protect the woman. Now, in the Legal and Voters PowerPoint, which I also have on my computer, there is a particular slide that shows a picture of a woman boxer, martial artist. She's a mixed martial artist. And she said she pulled a gun on an abusive boyfriend who was able to get the gun from her and shoot her. And she said, if I can't hold that gun, if I can't retain that gun as a martial artist, what's the likelihood that the average woman could do that? Myth 3, concealed weapons deter crime. In comparing states and countries, there's a statistical correlation between high rates of gun ownership and high rates of gun fatalities. Guns do not make populations safer, just the opposite. People with concealed weapon permits are often the perpetrators. Myth 4, gun-free zones attract violence. a gun, the thought is that if you have like a school, a daycare center, a church that's gun-free, that attracts people with guns to go there and shoot. Now, one of the people who makes this argument is a person who's a Senator, Dennis Baxley. And Dennis Baxley made this kind of statement. He says, think about colleges, drugs, alcohol, parties. Of course you need guns there. And to protect you. So the thing is, like, what could possibly go wrong with guns, alcohol, partying, and guns? But here's the thing, Dennis Baxley probably has a conflict of interest because he's a funeral director. There is no evidence that shooters choose their settings based upon any gun regulations. Myth 5, guns in the home are the best way to protect a family. What's the reality of that? For every use of a gun in self-defense, there are over 44 incidents of gun violence. If more guns make us safe, then why, with over 300 million guns in America, are we not the safest country in the world? That's a profound thought. Myth 6, guns on college campuses make those campuses safer. Every Florida State College president, every Florida State College security force chief begged the Florida State Legislature to reject bills forcing state colleges to allow guns on their campuses. I put the word forcing in red because that's what they were doing. In other words, a state college could not say, we decided not to do this. We decided not to have guns on campuses. They weren't allowed. This law that was going to put guns on campuses was not applicable to private colleges or parochial colleges or whatever, only to public colleges. Myth 6, guns on college, did we do that one? Yeah. Yeah, okay, and then it says, do the college presidents and security chiefs know that something that legislators do, the legislators do not? Do they know something the legislators do not know? Now, they're the ones on the campuses, they know their campus, they know their students, and one of the things I always hear when I talk to different people, they say, well, you have to be at least 18 to own a gun, 21 to own a handgun on a college campus. So we're not talking about the younger kids, we're talking about the older ones. Really? An 18-year-old on a college campus isn't going to know where the 21-year-old holds the gun? 18-year-olds are going to be able to get the guns, and the 21-year-olds are not necessarily more mature. And finally, consider this well-worn trope. What you're going to see is a flyer from an event that I went to, and the event was to sell insurance for gun owners. And the insurance made the claim that all kinds of people who used a gun in protection were sued, and they needed a lawyer, they had to pay for it out of their own pocket, and so they were selling insurance. It's one of the biggest scams going. And here you have it. Armed citizens should protect us against the power of the state. And then you see on top, shall not be infringed. And there's Hitler, Stalin, Lenin, and Mao. And they have statements about taking guns away from the people. This is what's sold to the people. That we need guns to protect us against the tyranny, the potential tyranny of the state. Necessary to the security of the state does not mean necessary against the power of the state. So that whole thing is a trope that you hear again and again and again. It does not hold up to scrutiny. So a lot of us, try to go to the next slide. A lot of us don't know the Florida gun laws. You might be surprised. But right now, I'm going to give you a synopsis of the Florida gun laws. So, a concealed weapons permit is a permit that allows you to carry a weapon on your person. And the thing was that the weapon had to be covered, and finally the NRA was making a big statement that sometimes the shirt comes up and the person can get arrested because the gun is exposed. So that they're trying to expand what concealed weapon allows, the permit. So you have to be 21 years of age, it's a background check, a 3-day waiting period for sidearms, demonstrative competency with a firearm. Now we have an expert in our community who is on our committee, and he speaks all the time. I'm not an expert, he is. His name is Tom Gabor. And the League of Women Voters state asked me and other people in other chapters to take the gun concealed weapon permit course. I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to. Tom Gabor did. He said it was absurd. He said the first thing that the professor, oh, by the way, the teachers of the NRA runs the course. The teachers said, to start with, nobody is going to fail. That's how he started. And then he went on to give the course, and Tom Gabor, who is an international expert, and you'll see more about him in the end, an international expert, an author, and he's spoken to Congress, he's spoken to the Canadian Congress, he's spoken to the UN, Canadian Parliament, and the UN about gun issues. He's an expert, he's a professor, a retired professor of criminology, thank you, I couldn't think of the word, criminology. And he said this course was totally absurd. Now, I wanted him to take the course, not me, because I wouldn't have anything to compare it with. He did. He knew what he was looking at. So, registration of firearms. It is a felony to maintain a firearm registry. Think about that. A felony. You say, well, does a gun have to be registered? It's a felony to register guns, to try to register guns. Why? Because they say the first thing that Hitler did was he knew which homes had guns, and he took away the guns, especially from Jews who had guns. And so by registering guns, the government has access to who owns guns, and they can take them away. BS. Pawn shops may keep records, but only for 30 days. After 30 days, bam, gone. Law enforcement must expunge records after 60 days unless it's an ongoing case. So here's a summary of the gun rules. So there are two different rules for handguns and long guns. Do you need a permit to purchase? No. Registration of guns in Florida? No. Licensing of owners? No. Permit to carry? Yes. Now I just told you what that permit process is like. Waiting period? 3 days for a long gun? None. Florida is a shall issue state. What shall issue means is that given these loose components of the law, if the person meets those and passes the background check, nobody in the state, not a local sheriff, not police department, has the ability under the law to ban somebody from getting a gun. You shall issue if they meet the guidelines. Now there are states that are may issue. So if you take the test and you do the background check and do all that kind of stuff, the local enforcement agency who knows the people in the community may decide not to issue. Not in Florida. We are a shall issue state. But after the Parkland, we got some relief a little bit, which is now being walked back. So what are those? We'll allow local authorities to prohibit violent or mentally ill people from buying or possessing a gun. And that's the red flag law. So if you know that somebody's a little bit deranged or the family's reporting, then local authorities now have the authority to hold off the issuing of that permit. Raises to 21 for the purchasing of long guns with carve-outs. What carve-outs mean, if you're a military person, if you're a police officer and you're under 21, that's a carve-out. You can still get a gun. But up until then, a long gun, you needed to be 21 to get a handgun, but a long gun, you could buy an 18. Now don't forget, an AR-15 is a long gun. Bans the sale and possession of bump stocks, and that's still in Right now, that's the law, but the NRA is challenging that. You know what they are? Anybody not know what a bump stock is? Okay, you want me to go over quickly what that is? Okay, a semi-automatic rifle is a gun that you press the trigger once and a bullet goes. And and you just keep on pressing. Every time you press the trigger, a bullet goes out. You don't have to do anything about loading. An automatic is when you hold the trigger back and it just keeps on shooting. Basically a machine gun. Those kind of guns are illegal in Florida. A machine gun is illegal. A fully automatic rifle is illegal. A bump stock is a kind of an aftermarket add-on to a gun that turns a semi-automatic, which is legal, into an automatic, which is illegal. But because it's a semi-automatic, it was legal. But right now, those things now are banned. You ban the sale of those. Creates a 3-day waiting period for all firearm sales with carve-outs. Again, carve-outs, if a grandfather gives a gun to his son, or a father gives it to his son, that's a carve-out. You don't need to do a background check. Provides $162 million for safe school offices for schools. Creates a guardian program for armed school staff personnel. That means that on the school campuses, if the school district decides it's an okay thing to do, teachers can be armed, custodians can be armed. They have to take a course of approximately 144 hours. What you don't hear is this. Is the state or the school district providing liability insurance for those teachers or those custodians who have the guns? Now, right now, a school district can opt out. But the problem is, what about next year? This year is voluntary. Next year might be mandatory. Requires mandatory active shooter training for students and staff. Provides $99 million to harden schools. It was not enough money, so schools are now having to use their limited resources for instruction to fulfill the requirements of this law. Provides $75 million for dedicated mental health counselors in the schools. Establishes a commission to study systems failure at Douglas High School. Notice it doesn't establish a commission to study the issue of gun violence. Requires each school to have a threat assessment team. So the school would have a team, if there's a student that they have concerns about, that would be a threat assessment team. Would study that. Provides $28 million to expand mental health service teams for at-risk youth and young adults. But no action on the banning of military guns or the monitoring of ammunition sales. Actually increases the number of guns on school campuses. Thanks, NRA, but this legislation is only a good start, but not good enough. It is thought that arming school teachers, allowing teachers to be armed and other staff, would add 400,000 guns on our inventory of over 330 million in the country. What about background checks? What do they check? Well, 2.4 million gun sales are blocked by background checks. That sounds good, but approximately 40% of gun sales are made without a background check, in spite of the fact that 92% of Americans support universal background checks. So what are the reasons for denial? Conviction of a felony offense, active arrest warrant, illegal drug or alcohol conviction, active domestic violence, protective order, adjudicated as mentally incompetent. And by the way, the ACLU opposes that because the people who are mentally ill are a class of citizens, and not all of them have issues that related to being a risk factor for gun ownership. Military dishonorable discharge. Another concept that people don't have any, usually have any awareness is the concept of preemption. Preemption, the state occupies the whole field of regulation of firearms to the exclusion of any county, city, town, or municipal ordinances. So talk about the loss of local control. No city, no county, no municipality can pass a law that the state does not approve. because it's preempted by the state. But there's more. Prohibits localities from enacting their own firearm regulations. A state can nullify local ordinances. There are penalties for by the prosecutor. In other words, if somebody says, I'm going to do this anyway, in my town, you will not be able to bring a gun into the courthouse. In my town, you won't be able to bring a gun into the school, whatever it is. This is the penalty. $5,000 and the removal from public offices. So there's other critical issues. Stand your ground, physician gag law, campus carry, open carry, domestic abuse. So individuals, and stand your ground, individuals may use lethal force if he or she perceives a threat. Perceives a threat? What happens if a person's paranoid? Perceives a threat everywhere. Applies to any place an individual has a right to be. Removes the duty to retreat. That's with the previous law. That if you're in a confrontation, there is a duty to try to resolve it peacefully by retreating. Now that's removed. Stand your ground. Removes the standing ground defense. When a standing ground defense is accepted, the shooter has immunity from both criminal prosecution and civil action. The new standing ground expansion. So this has recently been expanded. I think it was last year? Last year. And what is now, it removes the burden of proof from the shooter to say that I was acting in self-defense to the prosecutor, who must prove that the shooter did not feel threatened. Imagine trying to prove did not feel threatened. It's almost impossible to prove that. This is like in Monopoly, get out of jail free card. Why can't you sue the gun companies? Because of this law. Protection of Lawful Commerce Act of 2005. So I'm not going to go into that in depth, but basically the gun industry is a unique industry in terms of being protected from suit. So you say, my kid was killed by the improper use of your Remington, whatever it is, and we want to sue you because you're selling these guns to people who shouldn't have them, whatever. You can't do that suit. And what about guns and kids? This is from the New Yorker, March 2018. Gun country, a new generation embraces firearms. If that doesn't freak you out, a 9-year-old with a gun like that. So here are some shocking realities about guns and kids. American children, 5 to 11, are 11 times more likely to be killed by guns when compared to children in other developed countries. American teens, 15 to 19, are 82 times more likely to be killed by gunshots than teens in other developed nations. In 2015, on average, one person each week was killed by a gun-wielding toddler. In 2015, 3,387 children and teens were killed or injured by guns, which is a 13% increase from 2014. Now, you asked a little about statistics. The Center for Disease Control wanted to study the gun violence issue as a health crisis. Congress defunded the Center for Disease Control research of guns. Also, if you think about Benghazi, 4 people died, $7 million, and actually the figure is larger when you consider other fees, to $14 million. And what, 2 years, 3 years, and 7 investigations because 4 Americans died. Well, we have 33,000 dying every year from guns, 104 average a day, and Congress, up until the Democratic takeover of the House, has had not one investigation, not one hearing about it. The physician gag law. Does the Second Amendment trump the First? In other words, the First Amendment gives us freedom of speech. So, what the gag law was, what the gag law stated was that a physician, especially a pediatrician, could not ask the question, do you have guns in your house? They were not allowed to. If they did, they stood a chance of losing their medical license and being fined. Now, there's a group called Physicians Alliance. I think it's Physicians Alliance Against Gun Violence at the Home Aim. something like that, and they sued, saying the First Amendment protects our freedom of speech. In other words, if I go to a doctor and the doctor asks me that question, and I don't like that question, I could go to a different doctor. Why are you penalizing the doctor? But on another level, family doctors need to be able to inquire, are there guns in your household? And if so, are they secure? And most important is, parents need to ask the question, are there guns in the house where my child plays? Last year, I think it was, a 12-year-old kid from a family that had no guns, went to play with another family where they had guns, and the kid was killed because they were playing around with the guns. But here's another issue we don't usually think about, racial disparities, and there are. So gun fatalities by race, you can see the homicide rate among black people is 82%, among white people is 23%. Suicide rate among blacks is 18%, suicide rate among whites is 77%, so it's completely flipped around. And these are one per 1 million people ages 15 to 34 in 2014, the number of people who have been killed by gunfire, and it's hugely disproportional. Now, consider the fact that in the United States, approximately 12 to 13% of the country is African American, and then you look at this. What about guns in our schools? Well, here's a cartoon that makes it all very clear. I know the bottom is a paper shredder, but this is most telling. This was in the Palm Beach Post, and it was matter of fact, this is taken right from the Palm Beach Coast. This sign greeted attendees at the Brooklyn Fire Show at the Amara Shrine Temple in Palm Beach Gardens on Sunday. It says, all weapons must be secured at the door, no loose ammo and no loaded magazines. That was to a gun show, but yet they want people to be able to take guns into schools and nursery schools and churches. If guns make us safer, then why this? The NRA wants guns in schools, but they just banned guns from this year's NRA convention due to safety concerns. Killing kids and our failure to act is our national disgrace. So, conclusion is, no guns in school. Colleges, what could possibly go wrong? Open carry. If you saw somebody doing this, coming into a place like this, now what's interesting is that we have the ability to carry a gun and to react. Do we have the ability, if you're in a restaurant and somebody walks in with a gun like this, you say, well, I feel threatened with the stand your ground, and so I shoot. Well, I'm in a restaurant and I'm eating. Somebody walks in looking like that. Can I just get up and walk out? Because that person has a gun, and now I feel threatened, and if I walk out, can they hold me accountable for the bill? Because that person walked in? What about if I'm taking a test in a college, and somebody walks in like that? Can I just get up, and will I fail my course? And that is what Tom DeWar was saying, that is a right that we should feel that we have. When we feel threatened by somebody walking in with a gun, we don't have to react by having a gun. We can react by walking out, wherever it is. Here's a problem that I bet you didn't know about. When I saw this, I was blown away. They're called ghost guns. A ghost gun, there's two different kinds. You order the parts and then you assemble it. There are even groups that meet together, and they have parties, and they have donuts and things, and they assemble guns. But this one's even freakier. This is on a 3D printer. This kind of a gun can shoot to kill, but does not show up on airport security. That doesn't show up. So that person can bring it onto an airplane. What about domestic violence and guns? From Everytown. Everytown is an organization by Bloomberg, and he's very active in the whole anti-gun program. So more than, actually it's not an anti-gun program, we shouldn't say that way. It's gun sense program. So here shirts that say gun sense. It's reasonable and sensible gun law reform. So more than half of the women murdered with guns in the U.S. In 2011, at least 53% were killed by an intimate partner or family members. And right now, there is a loophole, and it's the boyfriend loophole. That is, if you're not living with a person, if you're not married to that person, if it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that person threatens you with a gun, because they're not intimately connected with you, that person, that's a loophole. Now, has that loophole been closed? It's still open. I think it's still open, still being contested. What they want to say is any partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, married, non-married, whatever it is, who is threatening you, who is harassing you, if you file charges, that person should lose their guns until an investigation is completed. When it comes to gun violence, the most dangerous place for a woman in the developed world is the United States, is America. People with a history of domestic violence are 5 times more likely to murder an intimate partner when there's a gun in the house. Here's the thing. There is no law requiring domestic abusers to surrender the guns that he or she already has. He just can't buy new ones. So if I'm threatening a woman and I have a whole bunch of guns, and she files charge against me, that they can prevent me from buying new guns. They don't take the guns I already have. In states requiring a rigid background checks for all gun transfers, gun transfers is not necessarily just gun sales. When a father gives a gun to his son, a brother to a brother to a sister, whatever it is, grandfather, that's called a gun transfer. So, in states requiring rigid background checks for all gun transfers, 38% fewer women were killed in domestic abuse cases than in states with loose background checks requirements. What about suicide guns? In 2013, 21,175 people committed suicide using a firearm. According to the Harvard School of Public Health, more people killed themselves with guns than hanging, poisoning, overdoses, jumping, cutting combined. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in people aged 10 to 24 years old. Here's the thing. One of the ways of trying to commit suicide is drug overdoses. That is effective in actually killing somebody in less than 20%. Some people say 2% or more. When a gun is the attempted way of committing suicide, the effective death rate is 90 to 95%. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, but it's made very, very effective. And there at the bottom, 85 to 91% of suicide attempts are fatal. So in cases by suicide, Wayne LaPierre, I ask you this: who's the bad guy with the gun? Who's the good guy with the gun? And what should a good guy with a gun do with the gun? Shoot the person attempting suicide? We always talk about gun fatalities, but what about survivors? 73,505 Americans survived, but their lives were changed. Now here are some fresh ideas. First of all, if you regulated guns as you regulated cars, look what that would mean. You would have to have tags, title and tags at each point of sale, driver training, gun training, a written test, practical test, health requirements, liability insurance for each gun, and renewals and inspections at intervals. What's really amazing is that it's easier to buy Sudafed, to buy ammunition than it is to buy Sudafed. So here's some good news. Gun seizure laws, which are the red flag laws, have seen an uptick. Now, in November, 14 states have such laws, with additional states expected to follow. So the red flag, go ahead.
I could be wrong, but I think the red flag, the protective orders from the court can take care of those boyfriends or anyone that would be threatening because they're gun owners to be taken away by the police going to court and going to that house. So the boyfriend law must fit under that one.
Okay. Whatever it is, if there's somebody like Nicholas Cruz that has already been identified as being a problem, he's the one who did the shooting at Parkland, that the local authorities would have the ability to remove guns from him with a court order.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, I remember reading that just a couple of weeks ago.
A judge in Connecticut denied a motion to dismiss a suit against the manufacturer of an AR-15 Bushmaster rifle. Remington brought by 10 Sandy Hook parents. The suit victory may pave the way for other aggrieved families in overcoming the Protection of Lawful Commerce Acts, which I told you about in the beginning. So this may be a major breakthrough.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, they did a workaround. It was how there was how they marketed it. They had it was something like "Be a Man," or I mean, it was some very designed to entice people who are already disturbed, teenagers, to go out and was it check your manhood? I think.
It's all of that.
Yeah.
They appealed to manhood, they appealed to American values, supposedly, whatever. And that was how the lawyer found the loophole to attack Remington and other companies, saying, okay, we're not suing you for the gun and the sale of the gun. We're not suing you for what somebody did with your product. We're suing you for the way you marketed that. And that was a major breakthrough. Support for stricter gun laws have spiked in polls after Parkland. Roughly 2 in 3 Americans now say gun laws should be made more strict. So here are some ideas. Some ideas are a background check for all gun transfers. Genuine reason. And that is, in Israel, if you want to buy a particular kind of a gun, a semi-automatic, you have to prove that you have a genuine need for that gun. In this country, you don't. And that is a way to get around that. Standardized training, not administered by the NRA. So a lot of people say, well, the Second Amendment prevents you from doing anything. Not true. Because some of these things work just fine with the Second Amendment. 1 gun purchase per 30 days, as opposed to somebody else to buy a whole bunch. And that's the exception of certified gun collectors. Voluntary buyback programs, very successful in Australia. In Australia, they had a killing with 12 people killed, and they immediately installed a program called voluntary buyback. They said, we'll pay you for your guns. You don't have to bring the guns in. It's voluntary, but we'll pay you. Thousands of people turned in guns in Australia, and you saw what just happened in New Zealand. Within a week, week and a half, they changed the laws. But a voluntary buyback program in no way has anything to do with the Second Amendment. Real consequence. Go ahead.
Well, there is no absolute right under the Bill of Rights. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. The First Amendment has exceptions. The Second Amendment has exceptions. Even the brain-damaged Justice Scalia understood that in his opinion. You know, it basically, if you have a law that impacts the right under the Second Amendment, it's analyzed under strict scrutiny. There has to be almost the only way you could regulate it, and it's a lot harder to get a law like that passed. But as you just said, there are circumstances where the state can regulate and still not infringe the right of the individual.
And somebody also made the statement, it's the Second Amendment, not the Second Commandment. Think about that.
Yeah.
But look at number 7. Number 7 is called a loaded chamber indicator. Did you ever hear people say, I didn't know the gun was loaded? Yeah. It is not difficult to build a gun, to create a gun that has a light that indicates it's a bullet in the chamber. And that would save lives. And yet the NRA doesn't want any part of that either. When a kid shows up in school with a gun, the owner of the gun should be required to surrender all guns under his or her possession and forfeit the right of gun ownership. In other words, if you cannot control the guns that you own, if you can't be the proper manager of those guns, you lose the right to have a gun because you are now a danger to society. So here's the difference between the Democrat and the Republican support of gun rules, gun regulations. And here is something that I thought about. It says, try this, Wayne LaPierre. Instead of arming potential victims, try disarming potential perpetrators. And the most important idea to end gun violence, is this, the ballot. Here's a poem I found that I decided to add on to this. It's people, not guns, says the NRA, but it's people, not guns, who always pay. Once again, only thoughts and prayers, and nothing fails like thoughts and prayers. And here's an example of what we're talking about. Look what's on this woman's forehead. And this is from Parkland, I believe. So, here's the book by Tom Gabor. By the way, Tom Gabor is a friend of ours, Arlene and myself, and he viewed this. I wanted him to look at this to make sure that it was accurate. So Tom Gabor's book, this is the most comprehensive book I've ever seen. And by the way, in the book, in the preface, is Arlene's name. No, you're not, and my name in the book. But here's something else. If you have any interest in this, here is a newsletter that's free on the internet, and it's called The Trace. It's wonderful, wonderful. Tell me when you finish writing. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are not alone in this cause. Here are some organizations that are involved. And finally, here's the petition. And I don't know if, Arlene, do you have them here with you?
I've only been handing them out, they're out on the table.
This is the petition.
Yeah.
So, I thank you for your kind attention. Lights. I had a discussion with an advocate of guns, and this is what I asked her. She opposed everything. And I said to her, okay, would you agree with me that a gun owner who leaves a loaded gun on a counter so that a kid gets the gun, would you agree with me that that's an example of irresponsible gun ownership? And she said, of course I would. I said, fine, we agree on something. This is something where we can find common ground and work together. And that's what we need to do in thinking this through, is not go after them, saying, wait a second, would you agree that it's a real tragedy if somebody doesn't know there's a bullet in the chamber and by accident shoots somebody? Would you agree that's a real tragedy? Well, yes. If you could find a way to avoid that, would you agree that's something we should try? Yes. Well, there is a way to do that. An 18-year-old kid invented a biometric test device for a gun. And what it does is it uses the fingerprint of the owner. So if you pull the trigger and you're the owner, and you've got a program, it reads your fingerprint, allows you to shoot. If you're not the owner, let's say I pull a gun in the crook and he grabs my gun, he can't shoot me with it. So people said, well, if my wife grabs a gun, what about that? Well, the thing is you can program more than one fingerprint into that gun, anybody you want. NRA opposed that. So it isn't about the Second Amendment. It's about anything that limits gun rights and ownership. Like their right, the guy who I told you about who opposed me about guns, he said, there is a peaceful, I said, why would any citizen ever need to have an AR-15 or an AK-47 semi-automatic gun? Why? He said, there's peaceful uses for it. I said, oh, really? Why?
Yeah.
He said, there are target practice that they have events and competitions. I said, let me see if I got this straight. You're saying your right to recreation with a gun trumps my right to life and my child's right to life and anybody else's right to life, because that's what we got going here. So we need to know how to answer these people, and this is why. And I'm going to end here. Is that there are people on the right, and people on the left. And people on the right, you're not going to convince them of anything. And they're not going to convince the people on the left either. Those two people, those two sides are locked in. It's the middle. The right and the left are speaking to the middle groups. And if we can't counter their argument, then the middle groups get lost. They shift over because the other arguments seem so simple and so obvious, and the fact is we have to be able to answer them. And that's what that paper will be able to equip you to do. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one
Well,
thing,
wait, oh, you-
I just wanted to ask if your presentation is available in hard copy anywhere.
Basically, yes, that's the paper that I created. It's a one-sheet piece of paper, front and back. It goes through the NIST, and then it gives you all kinds of statistics. That's gonna be-
We'll have it at the next meeting. And in fact, I can, I have everyone's email address, so I'll just attach it to an email.
There you go.
That's great, that's really
Yes.
the other thing is I think should be left out. Gun manufacturers, this is a very, very lucrative thing. It's probably one of the biggest manufacturing things in our country. And there's a reason why they push the guns. And I think people in the middle might understand that. You know, they're pushing the idea of guns in our kids. But why? They're doing it for money. It's not ideological, it's money, as far as the
Except what they've
manufacturers
done,
go.
what they've managed to do, my first slide, if you remember, is a picture of gun for the American flag. They've conflated guns with the American flag, with patriotism, with macho, with manhood, with all kinds of things. And so there are people who are in this country who are already, I use this term, people would argue this term, brainwashed. They've already accepted it. And once you accept a conclusion without the necessity for facts, and you ignore facts, your mind cannot be changed. So we can't convince them to change their mind, but we can counter their arguments to the middle.
Yeah, but the problem with the middle, I mean, your other statistic, 92% of Americans want increased gun regulation, sensible regulation. We don't live in a democracy. That's the problem. You know, the NRA has bought these legislators. When I mean, we should be saying, I'm not the NRA and I vote.
They do. And here's the thing, for the first time, you know, the NRA is a scorecard. They have a scorecard.
Right.
You get an A for the NRA or an F for the first NRA. And F means you're an opponent of gun laws. However, for the first time, there are people saying, the NRA gave me an F, and that's why people are voting for them.
Right.
It's beginning to tip. It's beginning to tip. And there are people who are not announcing that they got an A from the NRA.
What things I just want to say quickly, I think the membership of the NRA is for sensible gun regulation. I don't think that they're against it, it's the administration, it's the
Right.
corporate top. Second.
In other words, the people who are NRA
Yeah.
members don't oppose a lot of these measures. It's the Wayne LaPierre and group. Yes.
And I want to give you an update on the bond ballots. Last Monday, Gail Schwartz, who's the chair of it, 4 of us went to the supervisor of elections and delivered just under 3,000 petitions that came from Palm Beach County. So we are on track with that campaign to get onto the 2020 ballot, the ability to ban the sale of assault weapons. I want to, third thing I want to say is that.
Oh, sorry. I'm programmed.
In Broward County, they've had a very successful campaign called Lock It Up. It's a thing that looks like a small bicycle lock, it's called a gun lock. And if you put that on your weapon, it renders it inoperable. And it comes from the Veterans Association because the suicide crisis among the vets. And we'll be getting that here in Palm Beach County. The League of Women Voters is working on that. But then my most delightful thing to do right now is I want to introduce one of my dearest friends, Angela Williams, whom I met in, right after Sandy in 2013. She has lost 17 members of her family. Wow. What? 17 members of her family to gun violence in Riviera Beach and West Palm. This is our neighbors. This is an emergency. This is a national crisis. This is a state of emergency, and we have to recognize that. She found it in 2007. She lost her nephew, Tori, and saw the grief that her sister endured, and started the organization called Mothers Against Murderers Association. And she has been to over 431 funerals. And law enforcement know how she can handle families in grief, kids in trauma. They call on her when there's another tragedy. And like as Jeff said, not only is the family, I think all of us are wounded, we're grieved by any of his deaths. And if you ever see survivors of a gunshot too, it is just outrageous to be in the country. Angela, do you want to say?
I'm just glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
And just on
We're sorry.
gifts and stuff keeps her going. This is 15 years she does this. And what does she really want to do? She wants to have summer camps for kids. She wants projects for the youth in Riviera Beach. And she wants to have a building for giving food to the homeless, women's shelter. And I don't know how, but I need to say this because it's person to person on what we care about in our humanity. I'm sorry it took so much time.
I got one more thing to say. If any of you have another organization that you would like to have this presentation given, I give this for free. I have all the equipment, including my own screen, my own podium, everything. So it's self-contained. If you have an organization that you're thinking about, maybe would like to see this, I can give you my card. So, that's it.
I just want to add one thing. Chief Justice Warren Berger, pretty conservative guy, back in 1990, said this: "The gun lobby's interpretation of the Second Amendment is one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word, fraud, on the American people by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. The real purpose of the Second Amendment was to ensure that state armies, the militia, would be maintained for the defense of the state. The very language of the Second Amendment refutes any argument that it was intended to guarantee every citizen an unfettered right to any kind of weapon he or she desires." That's how far we've come in the last 30 years, circling the drain. When you have, a bum like Antonin Scalia, convincing 4 other swine on the Supreme Court that there is a Second Amendment right.
There is a Second Amendment right.
Yeah.
The way they interpret it.
Right. Yeah, I'm saying a Second Amendment right to an unfettered right to bear arms by an individual.
And if I'm not mistaken, the original purpose of the Second Amendment was to have militias to chase down escaped slaves. That was the large part of the purpose of those militias.
Chase down what?
Escaped slaves.
Yes, I did hear that before, yes.
That was the whole purpose. And
I'd like to, one other thing. If anyone here knows, I'm looking for a banner maker, okay? I can make signs, I can print out things, but what I would like is like a big, a banner, like a sheet that you can hold up, one person on one side, one person on the other, so that when we're on the street corner, all of the cars, it's not just a bunch of people holding signs that people are peering as they drive by. It's something that you can see from a block away.
am I going to be the other person?
What? Yeah.
We had one made for the Concert Across America. 4 feet. He's a wonderful guy. He's
Okay, could you, just, that's fine. Yeah.
This is a very dangerous thing you're doing. Turning over the name to him.
Guys,
One of the things that I've learned is like, we believe, like you posed several logical arguments and told people, you believe this, and you talked about the one that says that there's a sound in the chamber and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, people are not controlled by logic and reason. They're controlled, logic and reason will win the argument in Euclidean geometry, but not in real life. People are controlled by emotions and perceptions. We need visceral connections. The logic is definitely on our side, and it hasn't worked. We need more than logic. We need emotion and perception that will win our case.
I read something just recently, last few weeks, something about having pictures of the gunshot victims. Printing pictures in the newspaper of them after they've been shot, so people see what it looks like.
Emmett Till.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, the NRA
That was an emotion.
That's right, you're right.
There's not a huge
Can't
number
do
of
that.
NRA members.
Well, that's what.
I don't know the number, but I asked, of course, at
We have some other deadly weapons in the back made out of sugar.
and he talked a lot about the Second Amendment and its history. And he said it was never intended for a gun out of the house. The argument at the time was for some of the founding fathers saying, well, in addition to the militia, what if we have to protect our family from Indians or something? And so they made this little paragraph or, thought to say, okay, you can keep a gun at home. It was never intended to be walking around with one. And that's just historically. But he said you'd be amazed at how small the numbers are of members of the NRA. And compared to the power they wield.
Plus, I've heard gun sales are down since the current president is in office. They were all worried about the black guy, and now they're not.
Yeah.
no, that's not why. What they were
But
worried
whatever
about.
it is, the gun sales are down.
What they were worried about, and this happens all the time, is that you get a person like Obama.
Yeah.
He's going to limit gun sales, so you better stock up. You get a person like Trump, he's not going to limit so you can relax.
Yeah.
So after Parkland or after Newtown, gun sales in those areas spiked.
Yeah.
That's crazy. They spiked because they figured now they're going to put laws in that make it difficult to get an AR-15. I better get it now. Matter of fact, I better get several of them now.
Yeah.
Well, I think also I heard that the industry is kind of been saturated, so what they go for is designer things. Everyone that would have a gun has one, and now they're trying to
In
make
different
collections.
colors and
And you know that two girls committed suicide from Parkland, and the father from Sandy Hook.
Right.
And there was, this thing just lingers, and then, Columbine, one of the girls is in passage read about that, and something was said years and years later, what was Columbine, 90 something? And she just, there was, TPS, yes, because something was said from class, and she just went, and uncontrollable crying. So this affects everybody.
Would everybody take his card and eat chocolate? Or we have to take it home. Please eat the chocolate.
There's some stuff to drink back here too.
That was important about the emotions that people have, that affect people. Well, this lady here has pictures of people who were killed. And when you see